It doesn't matter if you agree with the literal truth of Christianity or not.
Is that you, Milo? All right, let's see it.
The founders did.
So I would rate this claim mostly false. Certainly there were a number of people who were involved in the founding of the United States of America who would emphatically endorse the literal truth of Christianity as it would be understood today. But on the spectrum of influence, when you are on the side of greater influence, I think you are less likely to find someone willing to endorse in public or in private the literal truth of Christianity. And you have a bunch of people who flat out rejected it in public and private. Folks like Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, famously cut the miracles out of his New Testament because he didn't believe in them, because he was a deist, because deism was phenomenally influential on the founding of the United States of America. Enlightenment rationalism was the philosophical foundation of the founding of the United States of America. And the most influential founders existed somewhere on a spectrum between Christianity and deism. And frequently, their Christianity was about social institutions and participation, and their deism was about morality and belief in the divine. So, for instance, George Washington talked about providence, which is one of the ways that deists talked about deity. But George Washington, in public or in private, never affirmed belief in things like the resurrection. I think John Adams probably affirmed belief in the resurrection, but he was a Unitarian who was critical of an awful lot of Christian truth claims. And you got folks like Gouverneur Morris and Alexander Hamilton and Ethan Allen and others who were also critical of an awful lot of the truth claims of Christianity, but were sympathetic to the social benefits of Christianity as an institution. James Madison was probably the most religious of the most influential founders, but even he never, as far as I'm aware, affirmed in public or in private a firm belief in the literal truth of Christianity, things like Jesus' miracles, the resurrection, things like that. And then folks like Benjamin Franklin were more on the side of the Thomas Jeffersons and the Thomas Paines than on the side of the James Madisons. So while they all recognized that Christian institutions could be beneficial to one degree or another, except for folks like Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson, who frequently said that those institutions were corrosive, very few of them would have come out and affirmed the literal truth of Christianity as Milo is claiming.
And they made a country for people who did.
So I would rate this claim even more false. While the majority of the original 13 colonies, when they became states, wrote either religion or specifically Christianity into their state constitutions to one degree or another, the federal government was established to be entirely independent from religious institutions. This was something that was a huge concern to the majority of the most influential founders. So even James Madison, perhaps the most religious of those influential founders, asserted in an 1822 letter to Edward Livingston that he knew that both religion and government would exist in greater purity the less they were mixed together. Because the majority of the founders knew that they came from a nation where religion and government were entangled, and they left precisely to escape what they saw as the abuses and the violence inherent in the entanglement of religion and government. So, no, the notion that the United States was founded as a Christian nation is simply not true. And even folks like John Adams, who signed the 1796 Treaty of Tripoli and negotiated it, had in there that there is no sense in which the United States of America was founded as a Christian nation. And while there were certainly those who wanted that to be the case, that was not the case. However, John Adams also stated that the government that they started was best suited to a religious people, not specifically a Christian people, but to a religious people. And this reflected an idea, a dogma, that was current toward the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century, which was an outgrowth of part of Enlightenment rationalism. The notion that in order for a people to be moral, they needed some kind of religion. Some kind of belief in deity and religious institution was thought to be necessary to engender morality. This was a dogma that is not supported by any data whatsoever, and we know very well now that it's simply not true. That's not how morality works. Morality is based on very different things, and religion is not necessary for morality, and as many of the most influential founders suspected, religious institutions can actually contribute to a great deal of immorality. So again, this claim is mostly false, and probably even more false than the first claim.
And if you don't agree with that,
it's not about agreeing with it. Those claims are just not true.
you don't like God, or you don't see why too much freedom is leading us all to hate and kill each other.
It's definitely not too much freedom. I think a better explanation is that it is increasing social inequities in a pluralistic society that is driving up systemic power asymmetries, anxieties about access to power and resources, combining with zero-sum thinking and the increased salience of right-wing authoritarian and social dominance orientation identity politics, which is contributing to fascism taking over the organs of government.
And you don't appreciate that we should not only restore Christianity in culture, but require it in public life.
So that is precisely the right-wing authoritarianism, the social dominance orientation, and the fascism, at least as represented by leading theorists like Paxton and Griffin, who understand fascism as some kind of ultra-nationalist process of cleansing or rebirth or restoration to some kind of mythical golden age that never exactly existed, and that rids the nation of the undesirable elements. And that would only lead to significantly more social inequity, anxieties and fears about access to power and resources, zero-sum thinking, and again, the right-wing authoritarianism, the social dominance orientation, and the fascism.
You should go to Canada. You should go somewhere else.
And you should actually get educated about the world around you and learn to think critically about why you are intuitively compelled to misunderstand and misrepresent it as wildly as you do.
Where there's a moral architecture built into the law.
So the founders tried to write some moral architecture into the U.S. Constitution because many of them recognized, after having fought in the Revolutionary War, that the civic virtue that they understood to be necessary for the flourishing of a republic was not present in adequate supply among the population of the states. And they leaned on the notion that religion and the constitutions of the states around them would hopefully provide for the moral underpinning that would allow their constitution to adequately protect the nation from tyranny. And again, because the notion that religion engenders morality was based on a dogma and was not true, that didn't work out. So Milo here is advocating for a return to precisely the failed policy that the original founders hoped would maintain the morality of the United States.
But here, it doesn't work without God.
Yeah, that's just laughably false. There's been a lot of research on this, and while the influences can get complex, one thing that is abundantly clear is that God is not necessary in order for a nation to be happy, safe, free, and prosperous.
When you don't have him, when instead people replace prayer and the rituals of the church with antidepressants, with compound interest, with games and drink and drugs and fornication, kind of thing he does with his wife, offering her around town like she's common property. America doesn't work when we behave that way, because we'll all just end up murdering each other.
Isn't it odd, then, that socioeconomic factors are stronger predictors of those behaviors than is the presence or absence of religion? And to the degree the presence or absence of religion positively or negatively correlates to those behaviors, it has more to do with the social safety net of community than with doctrines or beliefs. And you don't need religion to provide that social safety net of community. There are other ways to facilitate that don't run the risk of the abuses that are inherent to a lot of religion, including its co-opting by right-wing authoritarian social dominance orientation and fascist identity politics. So this is a profoundly misguided Christo-fascist screed by someone who really does not understand how the world around him works and needs to do so much better. And the fit for this video has been the original Hulk,